Valves have been lapped in. This cylinder turned out pretty well too. So now we're going to make this bore look like that bore. Here's the PTO jug after taking care of the cylinder bore, the valve pockets, the valve seats, and the valves themselves. So before we start on the other one, I wanted to show you what we were able to achieve on the first one. So if you look there on both of the valve seats, they've been ground lapped with a coarse compound and then a fine compound, and so you get a nice even pattern there. And then the corresponding valves, you have, this is the intake. So now we have a nice contact on that. And here's the exhaust. They cleaned up pretty well. There's one tiny little spot on the exhaust valve, that tiny little spot right there. But I think they'll seat in just fine. Now the bore has a nice crosshatch in there now. Most of the stuff cleaned up. The only thing I wasn't able to completely clean up, and I had to stop because I was running out of... I was taking too much material out of the bore. I actually took more out than I wanted to. I didn't want to grind away as much as I did. But I had that little pocket of corrosion that had started down there. And so I had to go until I could, basically not feel it anymore. There was more damage to that from when I went and pressure washed it than I had originally thought. So a little tiny pocket of water had sat down in here and corroded the bottom of the cylinder right there. And I had to get it out. And so I checked the bore as I went, and I ended up with about 3 and 1/27 on this bore, which puts me a little bit outside of the spec, because the pistons that came in are about 120. So that gives me about 7 thousandths of clearance, and I should have about 3 to 5. So we'll be a little out of spec on this cylinder, and I know that, but it cleaned up pretty well, and following with the theme of better than it was. Now, I should probably say that the proper thing to do, if I was running into this, the proper thing to do, if I know I'm running out of clearance in the wall of the cylinder, is to just take it and bore it to the next size. But we're going to do a better than it was service on this one. We're not doing the full rebuild, so she should seal up pretty well. I don't expect it to run 1,000 hours like this, but we'll probably get a decent run time out of it. Here is a good look of where things start. The flywheel cylinder is the one we're on now. There's the mount for the magneto. So the valve chamber here, the valve box is pretty gross. And the seats, pretty gross. Cylinder wall, not too shiny to be putting new rings in it. So, and then we'll clean the deck surface too. And the first step's going to be just basic cleaning, getting all this crap out of here so we can work on it. And then we'll remove all the old gasket material, and we'll come over here and we'll lap in the valves. Right in here, there's a pocket of material that's just almost burned into the bore. The wire wheel doesn't quite cut it. Let's see if yeah, Needs something sharper to kind of dig at it. The wire wheel just kind of smooths it out. It eventually will wear it down, but it just takes forever, so. And then in here, same deal where there's deposits that have built up over time that are right next to the valve seats. I'm going to try to clean this up as much as possible. I get a little screwdriver. You be careful because the actual, the actual running parts of the engine are real close to where you're working. So the cylinder, you don't want to put a big gouge in the cylinder. The valve seats that we saw on the other cylinder right in here. Be careful with those. You don't want to gouge those up. So I'm running right next to them. Just being careful not to gouge them. Still take some of this material away. And I'm just going to continue to do this up here, clean the whole combustion side of the engine. Get all these deposits out of there. Make sure this surface where the head gasket rides is nice and clean. Come down in here, clean out the pockets as much as I can. Then we'll flip it over and get all of the build-up crap out of the valve box there. So yeah, be careful. See how the screwdriver just slipped over the edge? Yeah, gotta be careful. This surface has been cleaned. It's not a medical grade clean, but it's clean enough. And now we'll focus on getting this cleaned up. And there's still a gasket on it, and that gasket is not the most fun thing in the world to get off of there. The other one took me forever, so this might take a minute. It's kind of nice keeping the exhaust on these, keeping the exhaust intact. It gives you something to grab onto. This is a bunch of build-up. It's actually hard. Around the exhaust port, there's a bunch of cooked oil coming off in huge chunks. So I'm going to clean that stuff out of there. And then there's a gasket around here we need to pull off. Again, more dirty work, more scraping. Yeah, really not the most fun task in the world, but it does need done. I just wanted to show you how much of this stuff is actually coming out of here, so you don't just see it dirty and then clean. There's actually enough for me to grab by hand. And pull out of there. Really huge chunk right there. Smells terrible. This side of the engine must have gotten really hot. Or had a lack of oil change. So the crappy cleanup part is done. Here's the inside of the valve box there. Looks much better than it did before. Let's see if I can get a light in there. Yeah, I mean it's way better. So I cleaned out inside here. Got the gasket material off of here. And then took the mating surface where it bolts to the case. Cleaned it up with a wire wheel all around here. And went around each bolt hole and ran a wire wheel in there to make sure that everything was clean around where where the studs come through. So she's almost ready to go. Well, almost ready to do the final machining steps. The next thing I'm going to do before we lap the valves in is I'm going to chase the threads in the block here, or in the jug, just so when we finally go and put the head gasket back on, we've got some good clamping force there. You can see a little bit of distortion where the threads had pulled a little bit right there. So I think it's going to make sense to do that now, because we'll have dirt and oil and grit and chips and stuff coming out of here. We want to get, the whole idea is to get as much of the dirty work done first, because the, lapping the valves and, honing the cylinder and then adjusting ring gaps and installing the piston, those last 3 steps it's pretty critical that you stay clean. Right now we can be dirty and it's okay because we're not doing any final fit machining of any sort. And really even the stuff that we're going to do by hand, which is honing and lapping, you still have to be careful. Especially, when you're lapping valves and you get the lapping compound here, you don't want it going down into the guide and then, scoring up the guide. So we're going to get the last step of the dirty work done. These, I think, are 5/16, if I remember correctly. Let me go grab a tap. Yeah, 5/16, 18. So we'll clean those up. And then we'll wipe everything down, do a final rinse on it with some brake clean, and wipe it down with a little bit of oil so nothing rusts, because we've got some bare machined surfaces here that'll rust pretty quickly, as I found out. I don't feel bad. So this is just a repeat process. I'm going to walk around here, get them all done, and then we'll come in to do the valve lapping. Okay, so now we've got both jugs next to each other now, and I'm going to show you what this one looks like, which is the one I've already finished, the valve lapping and honing of the cylinder bore, and then we're going to do the same to this one. So this is jug number 2, which is the PTO side, and I'm stupid, I just noticed this. They're actually labeled 1 and 2. This is number 2, right here. Right here is the number 2, and the opposite cylinder has a 1. Right there. So now maybe I won't get them mixed up as far as numbers go. So this is what the bore looks like. On the cylinder that's been finished. You can see the crosshatch pattern in there. And this is what the seats look like for the valves. You can see that gray ring right around here. What you're looking for is a nice even contact patch where the valve seats. Get this out of the way for now. And what we're going to do is start with the valves. So you can see these seats, they don't have that gray ring on them. These are just the way the seats look now. And if you look very closely, you can see some spots, and there was some on the other cylinder too, where they weren't sealing 100%. So we'll start with the intake. The valves are actually labeled intake or exhaust. They have a stamp on them. This is the intake. And what we're going to do is mount the cylinder in the vise so it doesn't move around on us. We've got the cylinder mounted in the vise. It's really nice to keep that exhaust connected because it makes it a lot easier to work on. We're going to take the intake valve and a valve lapping tool, which is basically just a suction cup connected to a dowel. And I've modified this one and added an extra piece of suction on it for better grab. The hard part about using these is if there's any kind of oil or anything, which, I mean, you're working with things that are lubed in oil. If there's any oil on the suction cup, when it goes to grab the valve, it'll want to slip off on you. So this one I've modified a little bit to help hold those valves. So you grab the valve with the tool, and you have some lapping compound. This is 2 different grits here. So the red is the fine, and then this is the coarse. So we'll start with the coarse grit. You take a little dab on your finger. Tons of YouTube videos on how to do this. And just add a little bit to the valve seating surface here. See, just enough there to get it started. I like to make sure that music is turned off and the shop is as quiet as possible for this, because some of the way that I do this is that I kind of listen for what it sounds like, and you can tell when your compound has thinned out so much that it's not really doing any work anymore. And we'll lubricate the valve stem. It's going into the bore there, or going into the guide. And you slide your valve down in. Okay, so now the valve's in there, and what we're going to do is just rotate this rod like this. And then you lift it up and twist it, and then move it again. Lift it up, twist it. When you lift it up and twist it, you're getting the compound to, you're grabbing some more of the compound because it'll squeeze out, and then you lift it up. When you drop it back down, you're in a new spot, grab more of the compound. And how much you do this is kind of dependent on what kind of results you're seeing when you pull the valve out and take a look at the surfaces. You're looking for a good, even stripe of material where the valve is seating against the valve seat. You don't want to overdo it because you can actually distort the seating surface. So I've seen people chuck them up in drills to try to make this a faster process. I like to do it slow and easy because you really don't want to take too much material away. It's kind of like finishing the bore. You want to take as little material away while still retaining the seat seal you're looking for. So, and we'll take it out and wipe off the compound. And we've got a decent ring starting to form around the valve. You can see that gray stripe that's starting to form. What you're looking for is a nice, even, consistent ring around the entire perimeter of the valve right here. And right now I can see a little bit of, it's still not quite there. You look at this one here, look at the seat. And on the seat, it was the same way on the other cylinder. The seat cleans up pretty good till you get towards the exhaust valve side. So there's more heat right here next to the exhaust valve, so it's a little more distorted in this area here. So we're going to run it again with the course. Put a little bit more on. You want to make sure you don't get any of this compound down in the guide. So you just got to be careful. If it feels rough at all, that one must have picked up some stuff in the guide. There. There we go. Yeah, make sure it moves nice and smooth. You can put a little bit of pressure on it. You don't want to put too much pressure and just squeeze all the compound out. You want it to kind of ride on the compound like it's a piece of sandpaper. And I can start hearing the sound change. It gets higher pitched. There's a little bit more of like a tinny kind of frequency to it. There, see that just popped off, so I got some oil on it. We'll take a look. I'm probably going to have to clean the suction cup so that doesn't happen. And we're getting close. We've almost got a full gray surface all the way around. We're still a little bit dark in this area here. Let's take a look at the valve. And the reason I'm using microfiber cloths is they don't leave all of that lint behind that you get with regular shop rags. They're pretty handy for the engine stuff. So we're getting pretty good contact patch on the valve. You can see that grayed area in there, that ring. So inspect it closely, and the valve itself is looking pretty good. We got to clean up this seat a little bit more right here. I think one more pass and we'll have it. And then clean the face of the valve too. Probably the most annoying part of the whole job is just making sure it stays on the suction cup. The last set I did stayed on the cup really well. I just must have got it oily when I was handling it. Again, make sure there's no grit on the stem. Okay. Back on there. Okay. Make sure the oil I put on the stem doesn't ride back into the valve here, because it'll break that seal on the cup pretty quickly if it gets oily. And you're not looking for a bunch of compound there. You're just looking for, you know, just enough to create a barrier. Back in. You hear the sound? It's real coarse right now. valve has a real nice stripe. And now we're just concerned about the seat. We want to make sure the seat's doing okay. And we're getting really close. But that's the basic process. You do the same thing for this side with the coarse and the fine. So after you get a decent contact patch all the way around, you come in with the fine compound, which is this stuff here. This is the coarse. That's the fine. You come in with the fine compound to get a nice smooth surface. A couple passes with the fine at the very end, and you have valves that are reseated. And you do the same thing for the exhaust. It's real simple. All right, here we have the PTO side cylinder number 2, flywheel side cylinder number 1. Valves have been lapped in. You can see the it's got a real, the valves are in pretty good shape. They've got a real fat margin on them here, and they have a real nice seating surface there, nice stripe. This cylinder turned out pretty well too, and a little bit of heat had gotten in over here, so there was it was a little more difficult to get some of the, there was a little spot of black down in here where the steel had gotten real hot. But they did turn out pretty good. So now we're going to make this bore look like that bore. Okay, I've got the bore mounted up in the vise, and I've got a light shining from underneath here. You can see this is, without having done any honing at all, you can see some light scuffing on the wall right here. You see how shiny the cylinder is. But if you look and you go down the bore, you can see the spot, that ring right there, which is where the piston rings did not ride anywhere. So you can see basically what is the this is like the original crosshatch down at the bottom. So we're going to take a 3 1/4 hone mounted to a drill, and we're going to put in a crosshatch pattern and take some of the glazing out of the cylinder. Again, the idea is to take away as little material as possible, but take out some of the imperfections and create a nice crosshatch pattern so that the piston rings can seat into the bore properly and control the oil properly as well. Okay, so here's our bottle brush hone. We got some lubricant here. This is a mixture of oil and thinner. Wanted to give it some lubricity, but also let it clean the stones as they go in. So the nice thing about these is that they kind of self-center in the bore. You know, they keep a pretty even pressure. You don't have to be too careful about getting it in there straight. And the whole process is pretty messy, so I've got a drain pan underneath. I've already lubed the stones. I'll do it again. So I like to do a little bit at first and then check it and just see where we're at. So let's come back in and take a look at the bore and see what just that 10 seconds of honing has done, and that'll tell us kind of how far we need to go. We've taken the bottle brush through once. We'll clean the walls and see what it looks like. So you can see it's a little more even. We're starting to get a little bit of a crosshatch in there. We still have a little bit of scuffing right in here. A little bit right in here. So we'll go a little bit longer with it, see if we can clean some of that up. It doesn't look like we have a bunch to go though. There's really, I can drag my fingernail almost on one section there. So we'll run it some more, and then we'll check our bore, make sure we're in spec, or as close to being in spec as we can be without actually, machining it. So we'll wash the cylinder down again. And lube up the brush again. You don't want to run it too long. The stones will start loading up, so you get a better cut and a better finish if you keep it clean. Alright, let's check and see what it looks like. Oh boy, I'm just about there. Yep. Couple real light scratches to take out of it. On the thrust face here, there's some light scratching. Yeah, we can probably get that out and not go too far with the bore. I'll do one more shot, and then we'll measure the bore and see where we're at. That should get us pretty close to being where we want to be. And this cylinder didn't have the corrosion that the other cylinder did, so I really don't have to go as far with this one. This one's probably going to take about half of what the other one did, which is good because I fell, I think, at least a thou out of spec on the other one, or at least my piston to bore clearance on the other cylinder is going to be about a thou out, or maybe a little more. This one, probably not. Oh wow, yeah, that's pretty good. I think we could take, if I wanted to, I could take a third pass. But let's check the bore size and see where we're at. And then that can determine how much further I really want to go with it. So here we are after the second pass. You can see a little bit of that scuffing is still evident right here. You can't feel it. You can kind of see it in the material. If you look down the bore though, you don't see the factory crosshatch anymore. So we've now completed the crosshatch all the way up the cylinder. We've got a little bit of this right here. I wouldn't even be really concerned with. You can't feel it. You can barely see it. And then there's a little tiny nick. I can't even drag my fingernail across it. I think if we're in spec, we could run one more pass through this and probably clean up just about everything. Okay, so I just checked this and we don't look too bad. The stones have kind of worn themselves in on the hone, so we didn't take off as much material as I thought. So I'm going to double check it and make sure. Get some repeatability in the measurements. It's a little harder now that the cylinder's been honed because it's not as smooth of a surface. And these are not the best snap gauges. They've got, the taper is not very deep on the ends, so you get to a point where you're trying to rotate it in the bore and you end up grabbing the edge instead of it rolling. So now that the cylinders aren't as smooth, it's a little harder to get a good measurement. Really need an actual bore gauge, but yeah, it's showing about 126. Yeah, that'll work. We've got room to go. The other cylinder ended up being about 126 and a half, 127. So I would prefer that we didn't have to go that far at all. But if this cylinder is at 127-ish, we'll take a final pass in here and get the rest of the little scratches out, and that'll be done. Yeah, you can see the edges of the stones are a little worn down now. The first cut on the other cylinder was it took almost a thou off in 15 seconds until this tool really got worked into the bore. Let's see what we've got. Oh, she looks pretty. She looks real pretty. I'm going to do one last pass. Quick one, make sure I get the right angle on the crosshatch too. Let's take a look. Looks really good. I can see some, like just a ghost of some of the original scuffing. Nothing to drag a fingernail across. The rings will definitely, I think the rings will seep pretty well into that, so. So there you go. That's the other cylinder done. We'll move on to the valves. We'll take the jugs and mount them to the case, grind the valves so that they are back into clearance for spec now that we've cleaned this seat. Because that will change the clearance a little bit. So we'll take care of that. And then we'll do a final fit for piston ring end gap in the bore. And then we'll fit the pistons and we'll be on our way. One last thing, if you're going to store the cylinders for any period of time, shoot them down with some WD-40 or something. That's a raw, open surface with a bunch of scratches, basically, in it. It will rust almost immediately. So, yeah, give it the hose.